Justice Riyaz Chagla, Vice Chancellor Suhas Pednikar, Dr. Rajashri Varadi, Dr. Rashmi Oza, Roshan and Iqbal Chagla and the family, distinguished guests, judges, both sitting and former judges, lawyers, senior advocates, and citizens. It is an honor for me to have been invited to speak at this lecture, organized in the memory of one of the greatest legal minds India has ever witnessed, Justice Muhammad Ali Karim Chagla. In no uncertain terms, Chief Justice M.C. Chagla has profoundly influenced and impacted the development of law and the protection of civil liberties in India. He donned many diverse roles during his lifetime, among them being that of a lawyer, judge, jurist, diplomat, and cabinet minister. After studying at the University of Oxford, he joined the Bombay Bar in 1922 and practiced as a lawyer for 19 years in the High Court of Bombay before he was appointed as a judge and subsequently the Chief Justice of the Bombay High Court. Though he received an offer for appointment as a judge of the Supreme Court of India, he let that offer pass since he believed that he would be able to initiate more change as the Chief Justice of a High Court than he would ever be able to as a puisne judge of the Supreme Court. After his retirement, he served as an ad hoc judge in the ICJ, India's ambassador to the US and the UK, before taking oath as a cabinet minister, taking on the portfolio of education and then external affairs. Only a few others could possibly come close to the diversity of roles that Chief Justice Chagla took on, and yet unsurprisingly, he managed to excel in each of them. Through all the various roles that he donned during his lifetime, he consistently upheld the rule of law, maintained an unbending faith in democracy, and advocated his belief in civil liberties. He staunchly spoke against the discrimination of Indians in South Africa. Similarly, his voice was one of the most vocal when the national emergency was imposed in India in June 1975. Right at the commencement of the emergency, addressing a gathering at the All India Civil Liberties Conference, he said, "I would rather have the Constitution abrogated than to pretend that she," referring to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, "is Constitution. She is democratic, and all that she has done is permitted by the Constitution. This is constitutional dictatorship," he said. In his autobiography, Roses in December, he defends the individuality of every citizen and states that he was opposed to the prohibition policy of the government and that it was no business of any government to tell the people what they should drink and what they should not drink. When the development of constitutional jurisprudence was in its nascent stage in India, Justice Chagla rested his interpretation of the Constitution on the principles of constitutional morality and constitutionalism. He believed that for the survival of a pluralistic society, it was important that the individual, irrespective of their social status or social class, is placed at the core of society. Speaking about Justice Chagla after his retirement from the Bombay High Court, Mr. Nani Palkhiwala had said, "The law was to him no lifeless conglomeration of sections and decisions. He illumined justice and humanized the law." Similarly, my father, Chief Justice Y.B. Chandrachoood, noted his contribution to the development of our young constitution and stated that his innate sense of what is just and fair and the liberality of his social outlook enabled him to hold the scales of justice even between the rule of law and the liberty of the individual. A young appellate side lawyer with no connections in the law, my father and many like him were nurtured by the distinguished Justice Chagla at the Bombay Bar. Justice Chagla believed that even though judges should not speak about certain political issues, they have a moral obligation to speak on others as citizens of India. Hence, it is an absolute honor for me to be delivering this lecture today in the memory of Justice Chagla, not only as a judge of the Supreme Court of India, but also as a citizen. Coming to the topic I have chosen today, it is important to first ask ourselves, what does speaking truth to power even mean? Defined in ancient Greek tradition as parrhesia, it refers to an act by a speaker to use truth to criticize someone more powerful than them. In India, it would be akin to Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, where truth is used as a form of non-violent resistance to those in power. As such, speaking truth to power aims to wield the power of truth against the powerful, be it an imperial power or even an all-powerful state. Crucially, the assumption is that the act of speaking the truth will counteract power and obviate a predisposition towards tyranny. At the outset, then, it is important to consider why truth is so important to democracy, which is the form of governance adopted in order to prevent the tyranny of the law and the tyranny of the few. There is possibly no better way to do this other than by first comparing the status of truth in non-democracies. During the course of the Enlightenment era in Europe, philosophers sought to challenge the domination of the Catholic Church and monarchies in public life because of their control over the truth. Hence, the Renaissance was not merely a literary and artistic revolution, but was also supposed to usher in an age where superstitions and dogma would give way to reason and evidence based upon actual truth. Similarly, philosopher Hannah Arendt associated totalitarian governments with a constant reliance on falsehood in order to establish a dominance. She notes that this was so brazen that people often lost a bearing of their own self in these states, and living the actual truth in itself became a political act. Even in early republics which served as precursors of democracies, truth was considered crucial in order to ensure the ethos of transparency and openness in the way of functioning. Truth is important in modern democracies, which have been described as spaces of reason, since any decision must be backed by adequate reason, and because a reason which is based upon a falsehood would be no reason at all. Truth is also important to instill a sense of public trust in democracies, that the officials in charge are committed to finding the truth and acting in accordance with it. Hence, it is no surprise then that the national motto of India after her independence has been Satyamev Jayate, or truth shall prevail. Truth also plays an important role in creating a shared public memory upon which the foundations of a nation can be built in the future. It is because of this reason that many countries opt to establish truth commissions immediately upon gaining independence from a totalitarian regime or after coming out of a period fraught with human rights violations. These commissions function to document, record, and acknowledge the truth of earlier regimes and violations for future generations, so as to not only provide catharsis to the survivors, but also prevent any possibility of denial in the future. In a different context, this role can also be played by courts, which have the ability to document information from all the parties involved after due process has been followed. In the suo motu cognizance of the COVID-19 pandemic taken by our Supreme Court, we have acknowledged this very role in the context of the pandemic. However, the relationship that truth shares with democracy is that of both a sword and a shield. The scope for extensive deliberation, particularly in the age of social media, exposes multiple truths so that it seems like we live in an age of lies, and that shakes the very foundation of a democracy. The citizens should arrive at a consensus on at least the basic facts that are backed by both science and society to form collective decisions and a collective consciousness. Hence, if deliberations are censored by the state, or if we either subconsciously or deliberately censor them, we would discern just one truth, one that is not challenged by us. In contrast, deliberation by multiple groups with differing viewpoints will pave the way for correction of errors in this truth. Ideas will be aggregated and disaggregated, and the entire process will help in the emergence of a creative solution that no one person could have thought of individually. Pre-legislative consultative process is an apt instance where deliberation between individuals has brought about impactful change. For instance, the draft bill for the Kerala Police Act of 2011 was published on the website of the state police, inviting feedback and suggestions. When the bill was introduced in the House, it was referred to a select committee, which conducted a district-wide meeting schedule. Almost 400 to 500 people attended these meetings, and the necessary impact of such an extensive consultative process was the suggestion of 790 amendments to the draft bill after nearly 4 hours of extensive debate. Almost 240 of those suggested amendments, most of which were centered around public feedback, were ultimately accepted. By contrast, in South Africa, pre-legislative consultation is a constitutional requirement, and any law that is enacted without pre-legislative consultation is deemed unconstitutional. In 2005, the Parliament of South Africa had enacted legislation relating to the issue of reproductive health care. The Constitutional Court of South Africa, however, declared these laws as unconstitutional since the National Council of Provinces did not fulfill its obligation of initiating public deliberations on the law. Hence, it is not difficult for one to understand why democracy and truth go hand in hand. Democracy needs the power of truth to survive. As such, one can consider speaking truth to power as a right of every citizen, which they must have in a democracy, but equally as also the duty of every citizen. However, to understand how we can truly exercise this right of ours, speaking truth to power, it is important to first ask ourselves, what does truth even mean? To many of you, this must indeed be a very strange question to ponder over, since truth is often easily definable in contrast to obvious falsehoods. And I know from the responses I gather sometimes to what I say in court, that people sometimes believe that what judges ask in court is imponderable. For instance, the fact that I am wearing spectacles is the truth, while asserting to the contrary would be an abject lie. Hence, it may seem that the difficulty is then not in knowing what is the truth, but only in identifying it. Indeed, Justice Chagla himself acknowledged that the most challenging part of being a judge for him was to undertake the nearly impossible task of identifying the truth in the cases before him. According to him, a judge could get closer to identifying the truth only when contrasting arguments were put forth by the counsel representing the contending parties. He said that these deliberations, arguments, and counter-arguments then aided him in his pursuit of truth. I believe that while the identification of truth may be singularly at issue in judicial proceedings, the very nature of truth can often be undeterminable in societies. Most commonly, truth is defined in terms of facts. According to the correspondence theory proposed by Plato and Aristotle, a proposition is true if it corresponds to a fact. However, it is important to remember that even the most preliminary facts can be disputed. Until this day, we continue to have a section of society which still disputes the phenomenon of global warming. However, a determination of what constitutes a true fact is important, since laws are enacted on the indispensable belief that the mischief the state seeks to rectify through them is in reality principally true and an established fact. Hence, if the phenomenon of global warming was to turn out to be a lie, then the basis of many of our environmental laws would be farcical. However, while it may continue to remain a dispute, the phenomenon of global warming is still a question for which we can have a scientifically determinable truth through deliberation, thus allowing the state to proceed with its regulatory action. A state does not seek to rectify merely mischiefs that are grounded in scientific truths, but also those grounded in moral truths. Take, for instance, the Bonded Labor System Abolition Act 1976, which was enacted as the preamble of the statute noted, with a view to preventing the economic and political exploitation of the weaker sections of the people. As such, the act was enacted on the basis of two premises. First, that the bonded labor system exploits people, and second, that such exploitation of people is principally wrong. A liberal rights philosopher who believes in the value and quality of life might argue that both these premises are true, while an economist studying the market and the methods to upsurge market output may not agree with them. This then brings us to the pragmatic theory of truth, which defines truth in terms of opinions. It is in this context that Sophia Rosenfield, an eminent historian, notes that due to the increasing belief of people in the non-existence of impartial facts and their legitimate sources, people's idea of truth has become more instinctive, where truth is whatever feels right to people. In a sense, truth has become personal, a matter of subjective feeling and taste, and not much different from an opinion. However, a quick glance through history will teach us that individuals sometimes tend to have opinions that may not be morally justifiable to others. For instance, Jean-Jacques Rousseau considered women as a class to be naturally cunning and believed that they should be governed by constant fear and restricted to be gazed as objects of desire. On the other hand, Montesquieu regarded Black Africans to be savage and barbarians who did not possess normal human traits. While these opinions were held by Rousseau and Montesquieu individually in the Enlightenment era, they were also sometimes shared by the general public. Women and Black Africans were not treated as citizens because they were, according to those who held power and could wield words, cunning, manipulative, and weak. Hence, the very fact that these opinions are acknowledged today for their racist and sexist overtones lends credence to the argument that truth cannot be akin to an opinion, since that would allow for personal prejudice to creep into its determination. It is in this vein that Daniel Patrick Moynihan, an American politician, sociologist, and diplomat, had said that everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not their own facts. I often wonder if facts are even considerably different from opinions in a plural society where there are varied lived experiences of different people. For instance, long before the decision of the Supreme Court in Navtej Singh Johar, which decriminalized homosexuality, and long before a minuscule population of our country normalized homosexuality, Denmark had passed the Registered Partnership Act of 1989, which legalized same-sex marriage, subject to very few exceptions. While India is currently transitioning towards normalizing same-sex relationships, more than 10 countries around the world still prescribe the capital punishment for homosexuality. In considering another example, we can note that 40 years after India legalized abortion in the year 1971, most of the Latin American countries are yet to legalize it. Hence, while for one part of the world, the truth would be that a fetus is regarded to possess a right to life, yet for another, this would be a false assertion. It was argued by philosopher Michael Foucault that different societies are engaged in different regimes of the truth. Even within such societies, different sections are governed by different truths, with often those in dominant positions imposing their version of the truth upon others. Hence, facts and opinions cannot be confined to watertight compartments when they overlap in various instances in their relationship with the truth. The opinion of a person is conferred the status of a fact and subsequently truth, depending upon the power they wield in society. This was also confirmed in a 1994 study by historian of science named Stephen Shapin, when he noted that even at the height of the scientific revolution in the 17th century England, truth was closely linked to an elite culture of honor, wealth, and civilized comportment, and was not a universal standard. In India, since women, Dalits, and others belonging to marginalized communities did not traditionally enjoy power, their opinions were not conferred with the status of truth. This is because since they did not enjoy the freedom to express their opinions, their thoughts were confined, crippled, and caged. Even after these marginalized groups recovered and received the right to vote, their opinions were reckoned to be untrustworthy because they were considered to be treacherous by nature. In India, during the British Raj, when power was absolutely in the hands of a few powerful members of the Raj, the truth, and by necessary inference, the fact, was the opinion of the king or queen and the members of the Raj. After the abolition of the Raj, the truth then became the belief and opinion of upper caste men. With progress in society and the annihilation of the notions of patriarchy and caste supremacy, the opinions of women, Dalits, and other marginalized communities are slowly but gradually starting to be regarded as truths in India. The sooner we do it, the better as a society. One way to address this problem is by broadening the scope of truth itself. And for doing this, we can look at the example of the Truth Commission, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which defined 4 different kinds of truth. The first of these was factual or forensic truth, which we could describe as scientific truth, since it is determined on the basis of facts and is the most commonly understood definition of truth. However, it is the other 3 which were extremely peculiar. The second was personal or narrative truth, which was based on the cathartic benefit of storytelling, where every person who was affected by the apartheid regime could come forward and tell their story in public hearings. The third was social or dialogue truth, which was defined by Justice Albie Sachs of the Constitutional Court of South Africa as the truth of experience that is established through interaction, discussion, and debate. The basis of this truth often arose from the dialogue surrounding the work of the Truth Commission, which happened in an entirely public setting. And finally, the fourth was healing and restorative truth, where the Truth Commission offered an acknowledgement of the crimes committed against the survivors by putting the facts collected by them in their proper political, social, and ideological context. These types of truth acknowledge that truth itself has varying dimensions and often plays different roles. Hence, when understood broadly, it has the capability to accommodate the worldview of different individuals and also offer them the necessary catharsis. Even within these broader conceptions of the truth, the question of the standards for its identification, verification, and validation still remains. Sophia Rosenfield notes that there are 3 very common means for the determination of truth in democracies. The first is obviously by the state, since it is the central authority with access to all the information that allows it to make decisions. Understandably, the state does not often adjudicate upon scientific truth, but it does provide them its tacit approval when it decides to form policies based on them. As such, all policies of the state can be assumed to have been formed on their basis of what the truth of our society is. However, this is by no means something which leads to the conclusion that the state cannot indulge in falsehood for political reasons, even in democracies. The role of the United States in the Vietnam War did not see daylight until the Pentagon Papers were published. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that there is an increasing trend of countries across the world who are trying to manipulate data on the COVID-19 infection rate and deaths. Hence, one cannot only rely on the state to determine the truth. The second means of determining the truth is by experts such as scientists, statisticians, researchers, and economists who can verify knowledge. Because of their expertise in a given arena, citizens are often expected to bow down to their determination of the truth, since it doesn't suffer from the malaise of a political bias. However, this is not always true, because while experts may not have political affiliations, their claims are also subject to manipulation due to reasons such as ideological affinity, receipt of financial aid, or personal malice. These experts are also often employed by think tanks who conduct research to support specific opinions. I have mentioned earlier that the truth of marginalized communities often does not see the light of the day due to their position in society. Similarly, these communities are often never designated as experts due to being prevented from accessing these positions through systemic oppression. That takes away their opportunity to contribute to the determination of the truth. Since their perspective is never taken into account, the claims of experts also suffer from the problem of their own inherent biases. Experts also claim to base their opinion on concrete facts, which aim to make their conclusion the obvious truth. However, postmodernist scholars have correctly noted that while the facts in themselves may be accurate, their selection, arrangement, and the conclusions drawn from them are subject to the individual realities of the person making these determinations. The opinion of an expert cannot really be considered as the objective truth, even when based upon true facts, because it is one possible opinion based on those facts, and not the only one. Hannah Arendt, the noted philosopher, therefore notes that this cherry picking of facts in one's favor has given rise to a spin in which citizens are not technically told a lie, but the facts are selected in a way to provide only a version of the truth, which then helps manufacture the consent of unsuspecting citizens. This leaves us with a third means of the determination of truth, which is through deliberation and discussion by the citizens. By paralleling, combining, and expounding the claims of truth in the public sphere. It is often argued that scientific truth that is dependent on the knowledge of the experts and truth that is out of the reach of the common man due to non-transparency by the state cannot be verified by the common man due to the evident lack of expertise in that field of science and the lack of information in the public forum. However, as responsible citizens, we should put these truth providers through intense scrutiny and questioning to convince ourselves of the veracity of the claims made by them. For this, it was equally important for those making truth claims to be transparent and conspicuous. We must together endeavor to create and encourage a culture that is conducive for the deliberation of truth, particularly because truth dances on a fine balance between fact and opinion. However, this brings us to the next question of who should be the citizens to take up this role. Immanuel Kant expected this role to be taken up by the European intellectual clerisy, the equivalent of modern day public intellectuals, where they would mediate between the rest of the population and the state. However, he took for granted that entry into this class was often barred by one's gender, access to education, and wealth. Similarly, Noam Chomsky, in his celebrated article, The Responsibility of Intellectuals, which was written in the context of the US ongoing involvement in the war in Vietnam, noted that it was the duty of intellectuals to speak the truth and expose the lies of the state as its experts. However, in contrast to Kant, he acknowledged that the intellectuals could only perform this function because of the power and privilege that their liberty is granted to them in contrast to other citizens. It is important to remember that every person, rich or poor, male or female, or transgender, or belonging to a third gender, as I said, Dalit or Brahmin, or otherwise, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Zoroastrian, or belonging to any other religion, has the inherent capacity to identify the truth and differentiate it from falsehood. This capacity to identify the truth stems from common knowledge, experiences in life, individual struggles, and much more. Many of them are unable to participate in this process because of systemic oppression, which either does not provide a platform for their voices or works to minimize their actual impact. Hence, while considering the role of citizens in determining the truth, we must keep in mind that this does not refer only to the elite, the privileged class of intellectuals, but includes everyone across the board. Therefore, it is imperative upon us to create an environment where this becomes possible. This is also keeping in line with the ideas of John Stuart Mill, who in his seminal work, Liberty, elucidated on the disadvantage of suppressing opinions when he stated, "The peculiar evil in still more than those who hold it. If the opinion is right, they are deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose what is almost as great a benefit, the clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error." Mill was a firm believer in the marketplace of ideas, where given enough time, the truth would always prevail over falsehood. But we must test the veracity of this claim in present times in what is now being called the post-truth world that we live in. To test this claim, we must therefore first define what does a post-truth world even mean, for it could have two possible meanings. First, that it has become exceedingly difficult for citizens to find the truth in this time and age. And second, which is the more disturbing possibility, is that having found the truth, they just do not care about the truth. If we go by the first meaning, it is undeniable that the phenomenon of fake news is on the rise. A pertinent example of this is that the World Health Organization recently termed the current COVID-19 pandemic as also being an infodemic due to the overabundance of misinformation online. Scholars have also noted that fake news or false information is not a new phenomenon, having been in existence for as long as print media has existed. But the rapid advancement in technology and the spread of internet access has definitely exacerbated this problem. It is often noted that even on the internet, the largest portion of the blame is often laid at the door of large corporations like Facebook and Twitter. Part of the problem is that while these social media platforms allow users to create their own networks and communities, it also leads to homogeneity within those networks. After all, humans and all of us are social animals and have an increasing tendency to associate themselves with fellow humans with shared lived experiences or similar beliefs. I believe judges therefore associate with judges. This leads to the creation of echo chambers or bubbles where people are only exposed to the viewpoint they agree with while never coming into contact with an opposing viewpoint. There is another issue which also relates to human nature. Human beings are simply more attracted to sensational stories, which are often based on falsehood. In a 2018 study, it was determined that lies dominated the truth in every metric on Twitter, including reaching more people and doing so quickly. Another problem is due to what can only be described as our attention economy, which is to say that there is so much information out there that we can only consume so little of this information. Hence, everyone in the marketplace is constantly competing for our attention. Leading First Amendment scholar Tim Wu has noted that because of this, the traditional methods of limiting free speech are being changed. He notes that when the First Amendment was introduced in the US, The state controlled the platforms of speech, and the First Amendment was designed to prevent the abuse of this power by the state. However, with the advent of the internet, the platform is no longer an issue, but rather it is about grabbing someone's attention. While someone's speech may not be removed from the internet, it can be effectively drowned out by flooding the internet with massive amounts of information to the contrary. This will ensure that many people do not even read the original speech or will be unconvinced of its truth. Hence, it is easy to see why Mill's marketplace of ideas approach to speech in order to uncover the truth may no longer be a valid option. The internet and social media corporations are not the only one to share the blame for the scenario. This brings us to the second possible meaning of the post-truth world, where truth does not matter to people anymore. While the advent of the internet may have played a part in this too, it certainly cannot shoulder all the blame. It is important to acknowledge that while we live in a world that is increasingly becoming divided along social, political, economic, and religious lines, this also leads to the increasing polarization of the truth, where sections of the population contest on your truth versus our truth, even on subjects that are unrelated to the common affinity that the group shares. This is particularly manifest when the political views of an individual interfere with the ability of that person to make an accurate assessment of opinion that is unrelated to their political views. In a very interesting experiment conducted by researchers from the UK and the US, a group of participants was tasked with categorization of shapes. They were asked to categorize shapes. Before the task would start, the participants were given the opportunity to learn the political views and skills on geometric shapes of their fellow participants. When the participants were given a free hand to form groups, it was found that participants grouped themselves with those whom they share close political affinity, though the task at hand was only to categorize shapes. This tendency to exhibit epistemic spillovers has led to the manifestation of multiple truths in society. No consensus is reached on the identification of the truth due to our tendency not to be able to accept or even consider the views of those whom we reflect to be different from us. We subconsciously filter the truth that does not align with our interest. We only read the newspapers that align with our beliefs, ignore books written by people who do not belong to our stream, and turn the TV on mute when someone furnishes an opinion contrary to ours. In sum, we do not truly care about the truth as much as we do about being right. However, who is to blame for this, if at all anyone? Indeed, social media corporations can be afforded some of the blame because their interface and algorithms help increase existing polarization. But doing so only ignores the deeper underlying issues in our communities and societies. People often have such differing conceptions of the truth because their realities are very different to one another. This can be due to the differences in their gender, caste, religion, or economic status. Even within these, a combination of factors will give rise to different lived realities. Indeed, if this is true, the question remains, what can be done by us? Of course, one possible way suggested by many scholars is to regulate the social media corporations. However, being a sitting member of the judiciary, it is not fit for me to comment upon that. Indeed, then, what can we do as citizens of India? The first thing to do is to strengthen our public institutions. As citizens, we must strive to ensure that we have a press that is free from influence of any kind, political or economic, which will provide us information in an unbiased manner. Similarly, schools and universities need to be supported to ensure that they create an atmosphere where students can learn to differentiate truth from falsehood and develop a temperament for questioning those in power. Justice Chagla also sought to achieve these very aims during his tenure as the Education Minister of India. We also need to protect the integrity of our elections and look upon voting not only as a right, but also as a duty. To do this, we need to ensure that all citizens are given a basic education and truly understand the value of their vote. Secondly, we must not only acknowledge the plurality of opinions in a country as diverse as India, but celebrate this plurality. This allows for more breathing space for all opinions and leaves room open for actual deliberation. In his autobiography, Justice Chagla states that kindness and gentleness are qualities which every human nature is capable of and which every human nature appreciates and is moved by. These qualities require neither special training nor special equipment. They are present in every person, only they get overlaid by vanity and self-seeking. Hence, it is important for each one of us to be kinder to our fellow citizens and not be quick to judge them for their opinions. At the same time, we must work towards ensuring that the barriers based on one's gender, caste, religion, language, or economic status are removed so as to bring everyone's realities as close as possible in order to allow them to have similar notions about the truths of our society. Finally, as citizens of a democracy that is India, we need to commit ourselves to the search for truth as a key aspiration of our society. I had mentioned earlier that our national motto is Satyamev Jayate, or truth shall prevail. It is crucial that we etch this into all our hearts and work towards living up to it by developing the right temperament. We can do this by questioning of the state, experts, and fellow citizens in order to determine the truth, and then speaking this truth to them if they choose to ignore or to deny it. I know that what I might be saying right now may seem too idealistic a vision, or may just seem impossible given the scale of democracy in India. To those of you, I wish to remind you of something Justice Chagla had said in Roses in December. And he said, the democratic ideology is always willing to concede that there may be an element of truth in every belief held by any particular section of the public. It is not prepared to coerce a minority opinion by the brute force of numbers. It is ever ready to discuss and debate, and is more anxious to get the minority to acquiesce in the decision of the majority than coerce the minority into an unwilling submission. The democratic temper is also tolerant towards human frailty. A man may aspire to perfection, but he is made of clay, and more often than not, he deviates from the straight and narrow path. This deviation is partly due to his own weakness and partly to overpowering circumstances created by the society in which he is placed. His errors and his lapses are not always wholly of his own making. We need a more sympathetic understanding of human frailty in the sphere of individual relations. I will not deny that the challenge before us is tough and requires constant effort from all of us. I hope that every single citizen of India does their bit in honoring the memory of the great Chief Justice Chagla by speaking truth to power and working towards bettering our democracy. Thank you very much.